So hi everyone, I'm Erik Kaulberg. I run INFINIDAT's cloud business and strategy, and I also have a hand in a few other fun projects. But the main reason why I'm here to talk to you is about this next revolution that we see in the storage market. And I know I'm not the only one in the room with one or more engineering degrees, but this conversation is as much a technical conversation as it is a business conversation, because we think that there's a fundamental missed opportunity in the storage market that is only now starting to emerge. And it's this concept of enterprise-grade storage clouds. So before I jump into the business side of that narrative, and some of you may fall asleep, hopefully not, but I want to talk right away about what we're doing in this space. We have an offering called Neutrix. We debuted it a few months ago and GA'd it after about 2.5 years in development. I shepherd the team who does all the development and all of that stuff out in the West Coast. And what Neutrix is it's everything that's great about InfiniBox minus the box, just available as a service. And what we can do with that storage service, which is implemented in 2 locations right now, is we can allow clients both to do this use case 1 here, which is simple disaster recovery scenarios from an on-prem set of infrastructure. But more interestingly, more strategically, we connect that to 1 or multiple clouds. And customers can consume, again, all the great aspects of that INFINIDAT software architecture, get all the benefits of the fundamental technology that Brian and Doc were both talking to you about previously, as a direct alternative to the native storage offerings in the public clouds. So that second use case, cloud-adjacent storage, we believe addresses an unmet need that we hear from enterprises. I talk to CIOs all the time, and they say that I want to get out to the cloud, and then I want to diversify my clouds over time, but storage is holding me back. So we can also combine these use cases, and the storyline gets even better. So, for example, CI/CD pipelines. We can support environments where you have your primary on-prem. Maybe you've got your production applications running there. And then you want to run dev test, only you don't want to host all the infrastructure, all the potentially highly burstable infrastructure required to support that full pipeline on-prem. You want to run it in the public clouds, take advantage of the flexibility and all that kind of storyline. And with Neutrix, clients could replicate from on-prem. They can take a bunch of snapshots using the INFINIDAT, the InfiniSnap architecture, and then they can expose those snapshots to their public clouds of choice, depending on which region they're in. I've highlighted AWS and Azure, but we have activities with IBM SoftLayer or IBM Cloud, VMware Cloud on AWS, and other major public clouds as well. And then they can distribute these bits of data without ever moving the data physically. They can make it accessible to the cloud that offers the right combination of capabilities and economics. And we're seeing a whole universe of companies emerge in this category of cloud cost optimization. But we'd argue that without some sovereign way to get the data to the public clouds without having to move the data into and out of physically different clouds, they miss out on a lot of the economic benefits and a lot of the potential, frankly, of clouds. So with clients who implement this kind of approach, they could say have 40 snapshots of that production environment running tests in AWS on Monday. And then on Tuesday, the spot instance pricing for the particular kind of instance that they require could change to be cheaper in Azure. And in a minute, they could switch all of those over to Azure and continue their operations. Again, no data needs to be moved from that source in Neutrix Cloud. That's just one example, but we also see applications for this kind of thing in analytics. I was actually literally talking to a customer about this earlier today, where they said that they've got some, I'll say, pharmaceutical research data, and they have big reports that need to be run on it on a periodic basis. It's not necessarily business critical. And the best place to put it is the cloud, because they have virtually unlimited compute capabilities that you can tap into. With something like Neutrix in place and the architecture which we're now heading into a proof of concept on, they're able to do that all while managing the economics according to what the demands of the business are. and all powered with just one single authoritative copy of the data in the Neutrix environment. So before we go deeper into the architecture, a couple other elements of the business model that we have built. We sell this as a service. It's not a box in disguise. That's a key differentiator, and I'll come back to a few elements of that storyline, but we think that a major reason why this opportunity has been missed in the market overall so far from the branded storage vendors is that they approach this problem typically from the perspective of a box. Day one, 2.5 years ago, when we architected this, we thought, what would AWS do? What would Azure do if they were going to build a storage service? And that's what we've implemented here today.
All OpEx.
So it's all OpEx. Now we also recognize, and this is again another one of the challenges for the traditional vendors, we recognize that the business model has to appeal to people who buy boxes and people who consume cloud services. And we've managed to fit those two pieces together in a really nice way. So I'll get to it in a few slides, but we've been able to bridge that chasm pretty nicely. Any questions on kind of the basic outlines or observations on the basic outlines of the architecture?
So just to be sure, it's not InfiniBox sitting in a colo someplace?
It is InfiniBox is sitting in a colo someplace, or things that are very similar to InfiniBox. However, it's a cloud storage service. The key is the layer that we put on top of that, which subdivides, implements all sorts of fun multi-tenancy capabilities, and perhaps most importantly, allows us to make setting up these cloud connections as easy as setting up a local connection or a replication connection. It's almost like it's a service broker, if you will, for connecting data to the services that want to consume it. And there's a lot more that it implements, but that's one of the key differentiators of this storyline.
And
so,
just one other question. You were talking about sovereign data, projected regions.
So today we're in the US in 2 regions, and East Coast, West Coast, basically. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's early days since we just GA'd the service a couple of months ago, but we have ambitions of being global, and we're already planning our next couple of sites.
Okay.
So, yeah. And by the way, when we talk about a site, we're talking about a couple of petabytes of data at a time, too. So one of the key differences here versus some of the other offerings is that some of the vendors in this space think of cloud as kind of a pilot light or as like a small scale environment that you have to support. We bring that same philosophy that Brian was talking about on the multi-petabyte angle to the public clouds. We're saying we're there to help enterprises with multiple petabytes of data make that multiple petabyte set of data available to the clouds that they care about.
And what format on disk does this take? Is it S3? Is it EC2? Is it?
So we do block and file. EC2 is actually a compute layer. We make these services available via, you can go and connect to an EC2 instance from our iSCSI and NFS implementations.
Natively.
And those are the basic protocols. However, we have more activities in the pipeline beyond that. But it's actually worth thinking about that a lot because the vast majority of bits in cloud storage solutions today are object. And that's, when you think about scale-out cloud architectures, you often think object first. We think that's a part of the missed opportunity because there's millions of enterprise applications that aren't capable of consuming object and aren't going to be rewritten for object for the foreseeable future, if ever. So we think bringing a combination of these enterprise class data services for the file and block side of things to the public clouds with the right business model allows us to access that opportunity. So here's what we deliver in a nutshell. Obviously, the flexibility point is really critical. We think multi-cloud is the single biggest challenge of everyone operating in public clouds today. And in fact, a couple of you, I believe, have written about this storyline as being on almost every CIO's ambitions list. Not necessarily what they're implementing today, but they want to get to states where they can scale applications and truly have the clouds compete for their business. My argument and our argument is that you can't do that without something that pulls the data out of the clouds so you can have that true flexibility. So we deliver that. And then from an economics standpoint, again, enabling clouds to compete drives economics for the customer. But beyond that, we have to be economically competitive with the native public cloud storage offerings, and we've been able to do that in spades. I'll get into that in a moment. And then from a feature functionality standpoint, I was talking about this universe of enterprise applications that are not ready for clouds today and will not be ready for the typical approach to cloud storage for the foreseeable future. So those kinds of applications benefit greatly when you can bring those capabilities to the cloud. I love to particularly focus on snapshots because it's not just legacy monolithic applications that benefit from these kinds of enterprise-grade features. You look at Kubernetes environments, you look at emerging workloads where you're running a lot of those test dev type processes, and having a bunch of copies that can be made of an application environment, of a test environment instantly can provide a huge economic benefit if you can actually use them effectively, and you can with the InfiniSnap capabilities. Resiliency is also critical. You've heard the 7 nines storyline. We offer a 5 nines availability SLA for the Neutrix Cloud environment. We think that's, well, it's 10x better than what you'll get from the major public clouds in their standard storage offerings. And there's also an important nuance, which is that there's a lot of talk around durability. 11 nines durability in some cases. Even I've heard 14, I've heard 17 nines durability. We contend that's a meaningless metric, absolutely meaningless, unless it's coupled with a strong availability guarantee. And so that's what we've really focused on. Regardless of the fact that the data exists somewhere, we want to make sure, and our customers want to make sure that you can actually access it. And then finally, the simplicity elements. You again have to be as easy to consume as native public cloud storage. We don't want our customers thinking about arrays. We don't want our customers having to worry about array layouts or anything like that. So what we've implemented with Neutrix Cloud is an API-driven approach that you type a command, you get your storage. It's that simple. Or you're paying a RESTful API, you get your storage. It's that simple. There was a comment?
I'm just going to ask one quick question just popped into my head. This is sounding like actually an awesome cloud-only storage system, period, even if I don't use INFINIDAT on-prem.
The two use cases are independent. So you don't have to have an InfiniBox to use the power of Neutrix Cloud.
Very good.
Yeah. And there's obviously synergy if you do have on-prem infrastructure, but we expect the biggest strategic growth in this as the market evolves and starts catching closer to where we are. We know we're never going to be the marketing leader, but we want to be the technology leader in this space, and what we're doing shows that. And hopefully that'll contribute to us help bridging this gap.
Erik, on the prior slide, you indicated that, and you had talked earlier about the fact that the InfiniBox supplies 7 nines availability, but your SLA is 5 nines. Can you explain why the difference is there?
Yeah, so this is a managed service, and there's a lot more elements involved beyond just the InfiniBox itself. So I like to highlight the 7 nines backend architecture because obviously that's a big part of contributing to that, underlining that 5 nines SLA. But when you look at like cloud network connections, those SLAs aren't as great as InfiniBox. Pretty much everything else in the course of delivering this service has less stringent than 7 nines availability. So we net it out to a 5 nines design. Other questions or comments? Okay. So let me step up for a minute to the business side of things. As I said, this is a missed opportunity, in our opinion, for branded storage vendors. When we first started talking about this, we said, well, look, the analyst firms all say this is like $10 billion, $7 to $10 billion when we got started on this in 2015, 2016 timeframe for public cloud storage. This is just public cloud storage as a service revenue, according to one of the analyst firms. We get similar numbers from the others. And why isn't there a big chunk of that has EMC's name on it, NetApp's name on it, et cetera, et cetera? Why is almost all of it, actually this is recent, so the amount of block and file has been increasing, but the vast majority of that storage, why is it object? Why is it dominated by the public cloud providers themselves? When you hear so many interesting stories about the development of products in the cloud space coming from the traditional branded storage vendors. And we boiled it down to 3 reasons. Enterprise-grade capabilities, actually exposed via clouds. The contrast between business models, and this is critical. It's not technology. Technology is a part of this answer, but this is probably the most important out of the 3. And then the role of multi-cloud. If you've got a cloud captive offering that's 10% better than the native cloud storage solution, which option are you going to go for? You're probably just going to pick the native one because that's easier. So let me drill into a couple of these and contrast what we're seeing in the market with what we're doing with the Neutrix Cloud offering. First, enterprise-grade capabilities. Snapshots are not just a repository for dead data. This is one of the things that we see. They can be great for instant restores, do 5-minute rolling snapshots, awesome. But we think that there's a lot more potential than that, and the way that snapshots are implemented in many of the public cloud storage systems, it just isn't there. From a functionality perspective, you're kicking your data off to object storage, for example, and then maybe you have the ability to take incrementals and restore over time. With INFINIDAT, though, snapshots are on primary storage, and you can do everything with them that you can do with the primary copies of the data, enabling those kinds of workflows that I mentioned previously. In addition, replication. There have been improvements here, but in general, the public cloud storage services depend on something else in the data path to manage that data migration or that data mobility across the on-prem private cloud environment and the public cloud environment. And we have native InfiniBox replication. Essentially, the Neutrix Cloud environment can act as a replication endpoint for the industry-leading asynchronous replication that we have implemented, and there's more to come in that area as well. And then I mentioned the meaningful SLA bit as well. We just don't see this in the mainstream public cloud offerings. And this means that they're fundamentally unfit for most enterprise workloads, especially if you're coming from an on-prem environment. Just for giggles here, we obviously consume a lot of different cloud storage offerings in the course of developing this. This is one of the emails. I'm not sure if any of you have seen these emails before that basically says, hey, sorry, we lost your data. Hope you kept it backup. So it's things like that that we don't think mainstream enterprises are really ever going to be ready to accept in the way that they consume storage in the public clouds. And we've absolutely architected Neutrix to avoid them. You'll notice in the course of all this discussion around capabilities, I haven't mentioned what's probably the first question on your minds. It's often the first question with customers: performance. Because we happen to have implemented Neutrix Cloud in facilities that aren't physically inside the public cloud environments, they're next door, we must have terrible latency because it's outside. It's got to be terrible. The truth is far from that. The reality is that we are outperforming the native public cloud storage offerings in many cases, and at least meeting their capabilities in the vast majority of workloads. And the reason comes down to the fundamental architecture. It's all the awesome stuff that Brian was talking about on the storage that allows us to serve up bits via block and file protocols faster once they reach the underlying storage media than the software stacks that are used to deliver the major public cloud storage offerings.
So Erik, what's missing from this chart is a legend.
Yeah, so I didn't want to name names explicitly, but number 1 in the cloud industry, number 2 in the cloud industry, and then INFINIDAT in green.
Yeah, but just telling me that it's EBS.
This is actually file, to be clear. This is file storage performance numbers.
Okay.
So there's one offering.
There are different classes of backing store for these sorts of things on those cloud environments, right?
Well, you don't have a choice with the backing store for the file offerings. So there's essentially one service level. Google introduced a revolutionary 2 service levels that you can pick from earlier this week. So we're using their default file storage capabilities for the 2 biggest public clouds, and we're contrasting that with our default file storage capability. And my point here is not to show that we're amazingly faster. My point is just to put the question to bed about, can we perform at least in line with the capabilities of the major public clouds? The answer is a resounding absolute. And the results, they're going to vary by workload for both the public clouds as well as ours. But the reason for that comes back to the architecture. Again, software-heavy architecture, I should say, heavy software architecture in the major public clouds themselves, coupled with a massive shared environment versus dedicated, streamlined InfiniBox type stuff with minimum overhead in the data path yields better results for the vast majority of workloads from a performance perspective. Then snapshots. I want to drill into this again because snapshots are more than just a repository for dead data. And if you accept that proposition, then you have to have capabilities that allow you to use them just like live data. So you can take essentially unlimited numbers of snapshots instantly with our Neutrix block and file storage offerings, and you can expose them almost immediately to whatever clouds you want. In contrast, just looking at EBS as a representative example here, you have to wait to offload the entire data set to object storage the first time you take a snapshot with EBS. And then your incrementals are tossed in that dungeon of archive storage basically forever. It's good for backup and recovery scenarios, but A, it's less efficient, and B, it's not useful for active data kind of use. So let me spend just a minute or two on business models, because again, this is as important as the technology itself. If you don't incentivize, or rather, if you don't have the right structures in place so that the sellers and your channels deliver the message around cloud as well as they deliver it on-prem, my argument and the results have shown so far that you can't succeed in the enterprise space. Trying to sell a storyline, you're going to have, if box sellers make more money selling boxes, they're going to sell more boxes. It's just simple carrot and stick kind of approaches for sales and channels. And we believe at INFINIDAT that that choice between a box or a service should not be driven by the compensation of the salesperson. It should be driven by the needs of the workload and the philosophy of the customer. And that's what we enable by making this compensation neutral to our sellers who are already going in and reaching big Global 2000 type companies in very detailed ways. But it extends beyond our direct sales activities. It extends to the channel as well. We've bet big that the right channel partners have a better ability to deliver IT transformations than things you can just pick up in the various marketplaces that are captive inside the major public clouds. And so our first and foremost route to market is enabling those kinds of channel partners to deliver the Neutrix storyline and empowering them to have that same kind of philosophical discussion with the clients rather than something that's driven just by something you have to get through a public cloud marketplace. I mentioned the business models already. So in addition to the 9 cents per gig per month, that is public pricing, by the way. We follow the same philosophy as the public cloud providers. We also offer packages. So for customers who prefer a more box-oriented approach or a more larger chunks rather than pure OpEx models, this fits nicely in with the business model because we'll just lump up a bunch of 9 cent per gig per month credits and then potentially even give a little bit of a discount if a customer is willing to make a commitment in that regard. Economics stand very strong here, and results will vary depending on the workload, but in this example, this is a hybrid cloud environment. We've added up the costs associated with consuming storage and shown about a 2/3 improvement. And all of this pricing is public. There's no secret math here. Cost of the storage, cost of the performance, we don't have extra cost for the performance, cost of snapshots, and cost of the network connectivity in a hybrid cloud environment, assuming that you're replicating to and from the data center on-prem. So this is indicative, and again, we're happy to run this kind of analysis for our clients. The last thing that I'll leave you with here is the multi-cloud. I'll send the slides later. You can see them on our website too.
Thank you.
The multi-cloud side. According to a recent survey of cloud adoption in mainstream enterprises from RightScale, one of these cloud optimization companies that I mentioned previously, the average enterprise uses just under 5 clouds. And there's a problem there. It's great that they use Google Docs and they use Salesforce and they use maybe a little bit of AWS EC2 and these different silos, if you will. But that isn't really enabling cloud competition. And what we think is that a big part of this missed opportunity is a solution that allows the clouds to compete effectively for the same workloads, or even better, to span multiple cloud or a single workload across multiple clouds. That would be the holy grail. Because if you're just stuck in a captive storage world, again, the typical perspective of a customer is going to be, why should I bother? If it's 10%, 20% better than the native stuff, I'll just use the native stuff like everyone else. And interesting reality here, this is actually very topical. If you as a vendor go and chain yourself to a particular public cloud, this is an example that I picked up. On May 8th, one of the vendors in this space announced something really cool with GCP. 7 weeks later, exactly, GCP announced capabilities in this area. And they have alternate routes to market, but all of a sudden, anyone who would be considering this in the context of GCP is likely to at least question their decision. With a sovereign route to market, with a sovereign approach that pulls the data out from the control of the major public clouds, you don't have this kind of challenge. So we think that ultimately when clouds compete, customers win, and Neutrix is our solution that delivers that capability.
Okay, so are you saying that I can have one Neutrix instance and I can access that data from multiple public
Yes.
cloud providers
Same data
without moving it?
Yes, without moving it. So there are solutions in this area that we see that like stitch together little pockets of data in different clouds. That's not what we do. We say you need the value of disaggregating the data from the clouds.
It's all via shared networking to that from each of the clouds to that storage device. Is that?
Yes, we leverage the various network capabilities that the clouds offer: Express Route, Direct Connect, that sort of thing. Okay.
So if I have INFINIDAT on-prem, can I do like an async to your Neutrix Cloud, or?
Absolutely. That's kind of that use case one scenario for DR, and then you can extend that to enable a broader deployment model as well.